It's uh, it's so lovely to meet you on Zoom. I was the first time I actually got to see you was when you came to Nairobi to speak about Stay With Me at Gote. And at that time, I hadn't even finished writing, and it was just so inspiring. And I could remember what you wore.
I can't.
I think it
Thank
was
you.
a full dress and and then shirt.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah. And also congratulations on being a Booker Prize long listed for this wonderful book, A Spell of Good Things. How are you feeling about that?
I mean, it still feels like a dream, actually.
Yeah.
I have moments when maybe I get an email and I'm like, oh yes, this is real. Um, so yes, it's wonderful. I feel very grateful.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So I have so many questions that I put down, and we'll see what we're able to get through before we allow audience questions. But the first question I actually wanted to begin with is on the broader topic of the theme of being seen in A Spell of Good Things, which is something you mentioned you were trying to accomplish in an interview. And looking at what is visible and invisible to characters. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about what made you drawn to exploring that theme in a
Mm,
novel.
mm. Thank you so much, Makena. In the particular sense with A Spell of Good Things, there's a sense in which it began with me realizing how much was not visible to me, or rather, how much of even what was visible was not necessarily legible to me. Um, and it became an idea that I was interested in and wanted to walk into a novel in terms of particularly considering people who exist and live in proximity to each other. And for several reasons, there are things that they do not see about each other, um, things they ignore about each other, and how power plays into that. So whether it's on the level of family, or on the level of a city, people who are living together in the same city or town,
Mhm.
as we have in a spell of good things. It's very interested in who can afford not to see, or whose very existence is dependent on our observance. They
Mhm.
are able to be of the other person. Um,
Mm.
and who are the figures, that sort of somehow straddle both worlds,
Mm.
who by virtue of some experience that they've had, are a little more attentive, than maybe other people in their social class. So it was something that I wanted to do. And with this book, I feel like I had the opportunity to do that, to have this cast of characters whose lives revolve around each other, and
Mm.
who in some way their fates are intertwined, ultimately, but
Mm.
who are circling each other and not necessarily always seeing each other. So that was of interest to me, because I had an experience where I felt, oh, there's so much I'm not observing, and I thought, I wonder how, that plays out on a larger scale.
Mhm. That's so interesting because I definitely saw that playing out between Eniola and Uraola, and particularly um, in, for example, architecture and buildings.
Mhm.
So with Eniola, I noticed that he would notice and have comment about have comments or ideas about the buildings that he occupied or that he went into and out of. For example, Glorious Destiny, we see the just even the come up to the building, we see the story about the dust and how that just impacts his experience of going to school, the three houses he lives in. But with Wuraola, I noticed there wasn't much noticing of the buildings that she existed in, even though they seemed to have they also impacted the way she related with people around her. For example, the family home and having the second sitting room that only chosen people go into. And that's something that I really wanted to speak with you about. Like, how did you decide to integrate architecture and buildings and how characters relate or don't relate to them into the book consciously, or was that something you noticed you done after?
Oh yeah, that was definitely conscious because these are two families. And you're very spot on in the things that you've noticed. These are two families, not only from different ends of the spectrum, but in your last family, for instance, has had to move houses and move sort of down, the social ladder in that as a result of that. And I think that with his character in particular, I was very interested in how he moved through space. This doesn't make it into the book at all, but the book began with, I'll tell you how the book began, what used to be the first chapter. And what used to be the first chapter of the book was Eniola, who is going to this, at that point, going to a public school. And it's been invited, the school is invited to a debate in a private school. So there's this private school where, as part of their corporate social whatever, they do this series of debates where they invite all the public school students, so obviously poorer, to come and almost sort of perform for these rich kids. And Eniola is one of the kids who goes from his school. He's not debating, but he's sort of part of the contingent that goes. And that initial first chapter was him just wandering through the school. So the whole school is in this big auditorium, and he just wanders through the classrooms, and he's observing how different this world is, from his own, from the school that the government has made possible for him to attend. So with him in particular, it was always very deliberate, how he's moving through a space, how he's conscious of his positioning in a space. With the other end, with Wuraola, it was also deliberate that she takes some of the space she's able to occupy for granted, because of how she's come up in the world. I remember, again, a chapter that doesn't make it into the book, but a little bit of it does. That chapter used to be from Motara's perspective, who's the younger sister.
Yes.
And it was this chapter where she wakes up in her room and just walks through to the balcony. In the book now, Wuraola does that, but she doesn't walk from one end of the house to the other. What you just see is how much space there is, and how there's this room and there's this other room and there's this one that nobody goes except for this type of people. But she's not really paying attention to that. And I mean, for anybody who's read the book, that physical space that comes under threat, later on. So it's this thing that she's sort of taken for granted as something that will always be there. She doesn't have the kind of 10 months old that Eniola has learned to have, with things and in spaces like that.
Wow,
so yes, yeah.
Thank you so much for those insights into the chapters that didn't make it in, because that just adds so much to my understanding of what was happening in the novel. I mean, it was such a well-written novel, but hearing those things from one writer to another is always fascinating to know what made it in, what didn't make it in. And so actually, we'll go into a craft question or a writing question, which is about what principles of writing did you learn from your formal writing education that you still adhere to, and what have you left aside? So as a writer, I myself I've not done an MA, so there's things I've learned, for example, just like writing tips like show don't tell, that I've over time started questioning, why isn't a whole book anyway just a telling in the first place? So but now from your side, from formal education, what have you kept with you, and what, as you're going through, are you like, okay, I'm not too sure if I want to keep this?
I mean, I think what have I kept? This is the second time I'm getting this question in a while. In about a month or so.
Okay.
What am I? Yeah, I was hacked by another writer actually. So
Oh,
it's very
yeah, it's a very
hard to
writer to writer question.
writer.
Yeah.
What have I kept? I think I have kept a lot.
Mm,
I think what the rigor of a year
mm,
studying creative writing did, and for me, I feel fortunate because I studied literature in English,
mm,
which is another perspective to writing. Um, they're two different things in my experience of them. The literature in English facility, gave me, I think, the facility to be critical, because you're really being trained, in theory and in how you read a book and how you think about it. So I feel like that end of things was very helpful for me, in that I feel that by virtue of that training, because one of the things that I learned to do as an undergraduate and as a postgraduate student studying literature was that there was hardly any text that I would read once. If it was something that was assigned, I would read it maybe thrice.
mm,
And it gave me, um, one of the things I then learned to do is start to write and hoping that people would read it more than once.
mm,
So I feel like for me, the way I tend to work, there are things that are on the surface that,
mm,
if you read it the first time, you see that.
mhm,
And then there are always things that are, sort of rippling beneath everything that are not immediately visible.
mm,
And which would, for me, would hopefully for the reader enrich the second read. And even if you don't read it a second time, there's a way it undergirds what is immediately visible. There's a way that it makes the world that the reader steps into feel fully formed and three-dimensional. So that, I think that that critical aspect, there's so much that I took from it. The creative writing aspect, what I think that I really got out of the year was a year in which writing was my primary responsibility. I hadn't had anything like that before then. I'd been in uni and then I started working. So writing was always something that I was doing, even though I had like 10 other things I should do.
mhm,
Um, for 1 year, my job was to write. And
mm,
it was liberating. It helped me to get deeper into my work. It helped me to think. The other thing that I got out of it, which I think that an MA is
mhm,
useful for, but which can be simulated if you have the right group of writers around you, were people who were paying attention to my work and noticing patterns that I had that I did not even know that I had. So there were things like the types of names that I would choose that up till then I hadn't really considered.
mm,
But by the time two people point it out from like two different things, you show like, oh, but why, but why? And then you now start asking yourself, is there a reason why I'm doing this? Is this a crutch? Is this something I need to learn to let go of? Is this something I need to, drill
mhm,
into? So that I took from it, the things that I did not hold on to.
yeah.
So I mean, a spell of good things I started working on while I was doing my MA.
Okay.
I was working on Stay With Me, but I wasn't showing the chapters, sort of working on it online. But a spell of good things I was showing, it was called a different title then, but I was showing some of the early chapters and I got a lot of feedback. And
Mm,
some of what I didn't take were actually some of the feedback. And some of what I took were a lot of the feedback.
okay.
I remember I got back to Nigeria and I had this pack because I took everything with me. And I would read, and by the time I read, like, I had about 9 people who were giving feedback. By the time I read all of them, I saw that there were about maybe 3 of them who had a sense of what I was trying to do, and maybe 6 people who thought I was trying to do something totally different.
Yeah.
And therefore, the the advice they were giving wasn't taking me in the direction of the book. I mean, I've told you like 2 different chapters that didn't make it in. So anybody who was reading it then did not necessarily know what, what I was trying to sort of wrestle into fiction. It's a very answer. I hope it's somewhat helpful. I think just also, made me a little more confident.
Sorry, hello, can you hear
Hi,
me?
Makena.
Yes, now you're clear, I can hear you well. So yes, hello? Hello?
Oh, okay. Okay. Can you help me become a
So I'm sorry,
Hi,
I
Makena.
Hi, yes. The internet or connection on your side just cut off a little bit. So
Okay.
yes, yeah. Now it's perfect.
Sorry about that.
That's perfectly fine. Yes.
I'm sorry about that.
Yes.
Everyone.
So it cut off around the point, yeah, when you were talking about the three who didn't see the direction that you were going in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the things that I also took away from it was a confidence in sort of receiving feedback that I didn't even necessarily agree with. And just understanding that 10 people can read the same thing differently, and you need to hone your ears to see who's seeing what you are trying to do that you've not done yet. Because in that stage, you have all these ideas in your head, and you have this thing that is like maybe 20% of the way there. And what you're listening for is the person who says, well, what about this and this and that? And then, you head in that direction. Well, that is useful.
That is very useful. And what I'm really getting from that is also the generosity of readers and the generosity of a team of writers and the people who are there through the whole process. And just the fact that no good book is a good book by the work of one person, the writer. And that's not something that I often sit with. For example, when you're in the process of working on a novel and you're looking at a draft and it's just so clunky, and it's a reminder that it is a community that takes it from this clunky thing to what is finally a book that is so beloved by so many people. But also the other thing I'm getting from that is the idea of just the confidence, as you've said, of dealing with being able to accept all feedback. For sure, I know that's something that I'm always very nervous about. And so, yes, and I think also because I, again, did not go through that process, although I do have wonderful editorial people who help me in the editorial process, but it's always a very nerve-wracking thing to take it to the next level. Okay, so let me see, let me go through my, okay, the next is actually about structure. So I wanted to ask what made you structure it into the book into a part 1, part 2, part 3, where part 1 felt like a runway of sorts, an introduction to the characters, to the lives, to what was at stake before we carry on. What made you have that structure?
Thank you. I mean, there were several things. I didn't start with a corporate structure. I started with chapter 1 to chapter last. That was how I started out. So when I'm working, I restructure quite a bit. There's something I like to tell some of my friends, that I think of myself more as a rewriter than as, for me, the rewriting is where the work really gets done. So I started with that. And then the 4 part came after I had a good chunk of the narrative down. And I was looking at it and I saw that, I could think of it in 4 different sequences, or even really 3, because the 4th sequence for me is sort of the inevitable sequence. And
Okay.
it begins with the quotation from "Every Day is for the Thief."
Yes.
I'm seeing if I have a copy close by.
I have mine
Um,
right.
okay, if you could just read
A-star students.
that. Oh,
Okay.
I'm looking at one. Um,
1 second. Let me get the page open.
yeah, so the quote from "Every Day is for the Thief."
Okay. That was at the beginning of the first part. Okay, yes. Oh, no. That's at the beginning of part 4.
Yes, part 4. Yeah.
Okay, I'm there now. Awesome. So, okay. What if everything that is to happen has already happened and only the consequences are playing themselves out? Every day.
And so that's what the fourth sequence,
Mhm.
felt like for me. That, you had this 3 acts thing that has happened in all
Yes.
these lives. And now they are sort of on a collision course that's almost irreversible. And we're about to watch it happen.
Yes.
So it was the sectioning was towards the end of the process. But the other thing that I'd been interested in from the beginning, once I knew that I was going to subsection it, there was a point where I was going to title each chapter, and then I moved back from that, was that I wanted to incorporate books that I was thinking, as I was writing this one. And the 4 main ones are there, and then there's one that sort of bookends the book. So the 4-part structure made it possible for me to then title, and I really am very pleased because those titles I think work very well with each section. There's the hopeful beginning of everything good will come, and then we go to what's Chicano's title again? On Black Sister
Black
Street,
sisters?
where we go to the mothers and we have this group of sisters.
Yes. Yes.
Come up in the world in a particular way. And
Hello?
waiting for an end, where everyone's sort of hoping for someone to come save them. And then, of course, we go to the date.
Yes.
Um,
Hello? Can you hear
Hello,
me?
Makena. Yes,
Yeah,
I can.
Okay, awesome. So now I wanted to ask, what made you pick novel writing as your chosen craft? And have you or are you experimenting with other crafts?
I'm not been experimenting with stuff. I didn't think I was going to write novels. At least when I was much younger. When I was a teenager, I wanted to be a playwright. I wanted to work in theater.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened quite yet. I've had a play that was staged in 2021.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
What was the play called?
I didn't get to see it.
Really? Where was it
There was
staged?
COVID. It was staged in Norwich. It was part of a project for the University of East Anglia.
Oh my
Yeah,
God. That's so cool. What's the name of the play?
it was called Provenance.
Provenance. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
So yeah, it's about it's very short. It's probably about 30. So like I said, I'm always experimenting. The novel, I think, was and because I read so many of them.
Yeah.
It was a form that I gravitated towards as a reader. And I guess when I then started writing, I started moving more towards it. When I was in my 20s, I was writing some poetry, which I think was very bad. And I realized it quickly
Yeah.
enough to move away from that.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a few published. I think there's some few lurking somewhere on the internet.
Are you also, by any chance, into Tumblr poetry back in the day? I remember Warsan Shura used to post on Tumblr as well.
No, I didn't go
You
into
were on
Tumblr
that level.
poetry. but I had my poetry days, and now I'm really in the novel.
Yeah,
And but I think of myself as a writer,
yeah.
which for me means that I'm open to thinking about form,
Mm-hmm.
in every possible way. That I
Mm-hmm.
think that there might be stories that I want to tell. There
Mm.
might be things that I want to think through that will require a different mood other than the novel. But for now, that's the mood I'm working with. I mean, and then, I wrote short stories for a few years, for quite a
Mm.
while, before I wrote a novel. And then after I wrote a novel, every idea I had seemed to be a novel.
Yeah,
So,
that's really, yes, I definitely had my poetry moment, and I actually saved them. I used to put them on Instagram, and oof, I went back to them and I was like, thank God this didn't become anything. I also find short stories to be a very difficult form, and I have so much I just a lot of what's the word for it? Just I'm very impressed by short story writers, and uh, I also tend to think about ideas in terms of the novel form. But I'm very curious about if ever there'll be a day that it might change into any other form. So I myself haven't experimented beyond novel and the really bad poetry that I did back in the day. So I on the Guardian, you on the Guardian interview that I saw, maybe it was on a couple of months ago, you talked about how you were committed to not being read for anthropological reasons. And I wanted to ask how you went about assuring that that commitment was honored through the book production process, where there's editors and so on, and marketing. And are there things you have a say on, or you had a say on, and things you didn't have a say on? Yes. So.
yeah, I mean, this, I'm forgetting who said this thing. I remember once this is over, but right now. It's something that I think of, somewhat snappily sometimes. Um, Someone who said, I know what I am giving you, I don't know what you've received. So in
Thank
terms
you.
of how one will be read, I don't think that you really have much control over it. Because the book goes into the world and it does its things, and people, if you read it, everybody reads through their own lens, and that's fine. What I think I really have control over, like you rightly said, is how I engage with it. The kind of conversations that I'm interested in entering into about it. And anthropology is one of things people come to books for. But what I am not interested in is in being read primarily, as a sociologist or as an anthropologist, or
Mm.
as someone said once in my hearing, a village explainer. Um,
Yeah,
you know, Now come and explain your people to the rest of the world.
yeah.
I always want to proceed from the assumption that um, at a fundamental level, human beings are not incomprehensible to one another. Um, there are, of course, distinctions in culture, there are distinctions in all kinds of things. But at a
Mm.
very fundamental level,
Yeah.
we're not, So I try to write from that assumption, and I hope
Mm.
that I can be read from that, from that point,
Mhm.
by anyone in the world. And often say this, that I say it as a reader who's
Mm.
had to come into worlds that were not fully legible to me as a matter of course, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
ever since I was a child. And I
Yeah.
still got on with it. I think that many readers just get on with it,
Mhm.
So
That's true.
and now I feel like I've gone off a tangent and I've forgotten the actual question. Okay, you
No,
were
you
talking
have.
about the process.
Yes, the book.
So
Yeah, in the book production process, in the way you engage with the publishers, and yes.
mhm. I mean, I think that I've been very fortunate. Um, I've been very fortunate, particularly with Stay With Me and this,
Mm.
that I've worked with teams that have listened to me. and I've been attentive uh, to my vision and how I want that vision positioned. I've been very, very, very fortunate in that. And I'll tell you, because, for instance, when I was trying to get Stay With Me published and I was pitching to agents, I received all kinds of emails, which obviously now in retrospect indicated that this were not the people who should have represented my work. I won't go into some of the details, but now by the time Stay With Me was published, I think that it had what was to me an unexpected, really global success. That I feel like many of the people who said no to it, and there were a lot, were apprehensive that this story, who's going to care about this outside of this particular place. And I wondered about that too, that it was a story I wanted to tell, was something that was important, and I wanted I was committed to it. And I think that has sort of earned me, it's made it possible for me to do the kind of work that I've been able to do after it, the fact that the people who took a chance on it saw it succeed. And the teams, like I said, that I've worked with have been people who honestly have been very attentive, very, they've been careful to listen to my vision, and I've been careful to position it, to listen to how I want it positioned. And I'm very, very grateful for that. I know that not everybody has that experience. And I'm very, very grateful that I do.
Hello?
Hi, Makena.
Yes, we're on. Okay, wow, that is an amazing experience that you've had. And I'm so happy for you that you've had that amazing experience. And that's definitely something I hope for and I wish for so many authors from the continent who are going to be getting published. And just to have that feeling of being understood, being seen, and being and that care that's been taken with the work. And you can see it in how the novel really just feels like it is truly for us. And so I had another question about Yeye. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Yeye.
Yeye. So I wanted to ask, so we call my mom at home Agi by her first name. And I wanted to ask if this was a choice that you would also made for the kids, with Uraula and Mutara, to call her Yeye. And I thought that was very interesting because it's not what I would have expected, considering that there's this idea of like a traditional idea of this is how somebody is a mother or a parent is supposed to be addressed. So would you like to talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Excuse me. So the other thing that I was interested in with the book is, names as identity and how people move through it, as they go through life, as you're aware, when someone is born, they're called this. When they move into a different phase of life, they're sort of called this other thing. And, it's like, I'd say for some of my, say, great and grand aunties, I don't even know what their first names are, like, no idea. Because I was born so long after anybody was calling them that, So I wanted to sort of think through that and play with that, particularly with the mothers, and your last mother as a chapter that sort of, walks through, before she became she was aborted.
Yes.
Which Yeye is it's an interesting name because it's a name that in certain dialects of Yoruba language is used to refer to a mother.
Okay.
And it's also like James' title. And I think that for her, it's sort of a badge of having risen from some of the challenges she had growing up. Yeah. So that's what she it's the identity that she's holding on to. and hoping to cling to. And so I wanted to reflect that in even the way that children see her, that they don't necessarily just call her mom, or, that it's this title that is both a signifier for mother, but also a signifier of, the chieftaincy position that she occupies in society, that she is someone who is important for her to also carry that into the domestic space.
Yeah. Yeye was such an interesting character for me because she really embodied the concept of a spell of good things just her entire life. But also I was interested in the lengths she'd kind of go to maintain or keep those little spells of good things, the moments that were good. For example, her unwillingness to ask Wuraola difficult questions about her relationship. And I noticed this isn't just her character. We have many characters who are actually seeing things, but not, or seeing things, or could be seeing things, but are remaining ignorant to protect themselves. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what this spell of good things really, why that title? What is it supposed to be doing? Is it the characters who create the good things, or who maintain the good things? Is it how they, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. The character, the title, comes from Yeye's consciousness, in the book. She's thinking, that our perspective of life is how, things are sort of rough all the time, and then you have these little spells and I wanted to think, the title is really from that perspective, and also in relation to the town that they're living in, the social milieu that they're living in. And I think part of what is asking is the question of the possibility of having good things for any sustained period in a social political dynamic that is set up like this, whatever end of the spectrum you're on. So that's part of what it's thinking through, that everyone in this book, except for maybe Auntie Carol, is very aspirational. Yeye is in the point, and she more than her husband and even her children is very aware of how tenuous that position can be. She knows that things can, change just like that. The others don't quite see it that way yet. And I think that's what that title is thinking through. It's thinking in relation, to that town, and that town as a standing for the country.
Awesome.
It's politics and it's social milieu.
No, Yeye's character was very fascinating, and definitely a good reason for a second read if anyone needs one. Yeah,
I'm very interested in our character. I think I've said it somewhere else, that I'm very interested in Nigerian women of that generation and the compromises that they have to make within themselves to make their lives possible. I'm very fascinated by women like her, and I guess that comes through.
Yeah, no, it really does. So I think I will now give it over to the audience. If anybody would like to ask Ayọ bámi a question, please put your hand up, and Ndegwa will unmute you. In the meantime, as we're waiting for that, we're just gonna keep going and see how things carry on as we do this. What are you currently reading? Oh wait, we have a question, we have a hand. So from Dr. Joyce Nero. So that was just gonna unmute her.
Hi, thank you so much for this conversation. I really Really a question. I just want to say to you, Ayọ bámi, first of all, amazing. Your writing is just amazing. And I don't know how many times you've heard this about the ways in which you are read. Let me tell you about the ways in which you're read in my household. Your work is the kind of novel, we call it inflicting the work on each other. Because you cannot read it and keep quiet, and you cannot read it and be alone. So it's the novel that you buy people as a gift. It's the one that you read and wait for somebody to finish reading so that you have somebody to talk to. So what I want to say is the story keeps evolving because you keep talking to people about it. And I have to tell you what I won't tell you what Stay With Me did to me because it was very embarrassing. But I will tell you what A Spell of Good Things did to me. I finished reading that book on Easter Monday and I walked for 2 kilometers because those characters needed to leave my head. I didn't have somebody to talk to. I have to say this to you. One of my friends who I inflicted the book on then finished it, and she got in touch with me and we did a 1-hour call, and she wanted to know because, like me, she spent many years teaching literature at university level. And I love what you said about being a student of literature and what it teaches you about how to write, because you understand ways in which you can be read. I love that. So this friend of mine read A Spell of Good Things, and in our conversation, she said to me, Joyce, if we were teaching this book, what would we tell our students about hope? Where is the hope in this society? I don't need you to answer that question, but I just need you to know that the ending of both those books, but I've gotten over the ending of Stay With Me. So let me stay with the ending of A Spell of Good Things, which I am still in acute pain over. I'm the only one who feels this, but
Dr.
it
Nehru,
was rather abrupt. It was abrupt. Can we talk about that, please?
I'm very happy to. I'm very happy to. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. That means so much. It means a lot to me. The ending of A Spell of Good Things was very deliberate. Because for me, by the time I was finishing this book, I had a sense of urgency. I finished working on it while I was in Lagos, and I was walking out of, into the streets and seeing the book play out on the streets, and I felt at that point that we were carrying on as a people, because what else do you do, really? And I felt and still feel in many instances that it's almost like the roof is on fire and everybody just is concentrating on their cup of tea. And so with this book, I wanted it. I think it's both a cry for help of some kind from my own mind, just looking at the way things are, and I hope a call to action to someone somewhere. So that ending was very, by the time I figured it out, I couldn't write for maybe about 3 months because I was trying to think of some way to not get to that point. But at some point, I realized that, this is what happened. And, I don't want to give spoilers. There was someone who asked me a question, something that happened in Lagos very recently to a young doctor that made me think of something that happened to a young doctor in the book. And I just thought, yeah, this is why I had to write this, because I feel like there are all these minor, quote unquote, minor tragedies that happen that people just, it's in the news for 2 days and people move on. And the novel for me felt like a place to sort of concentrate that into these surreal lives that had been changed and been shaped by some of these policy decisions. And I wanted, and there's something that Makena said, that it feels like a book that is for us. in terms of thinking about Nigeria, I wanted Nigerians to sit with this book and be uncomfortable at the end. Because sometimes, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who feels that way. You're like, we can't go on like this. It's too, something is going to explode at some point, and with this one, that ending is just like a mini explosion. So thank you so much, Dr. Joyce. That was my literature lecturers were very proud. Okay.
That was a really good question. We have another question from Nyaga, but just before that, I want to say, when I finished Stay With Me, I called Dr. Nairo in tears. It was the morning, I was at work in tears, and she said, what are you doing? Because she hadn't finished reading it at that point. She said, and so she thought I was being dramatic until she read it on the plane and was herself in tears. And I said, well, funny how. So you really did it with that book. Okay, Nyaga, would you like to ask your question?
Hi everyone. My name is Winnie Nyaga. Beautiful writing, Ayọ bámi. So mine is not more of a question, comment. It's something I noticed with Carol the tailor. I love how she opened the book and closed it as well. So the art of tailoring, to stitch things together, it's like she bound this book together. Was that something intentional, or why particularly did you choose the craft of tailoring? Thank you.
Oh yes, thank you. She's one of my favorite people in that book, because I feel like she's the person she's comfortable in her own skin, in a way that not necessarily many people are in the book. So yes, I wanted a tailor, because in practical terms, I was thinking of the city. I had one family on the one hand, I had another family on the other hand, and I'm thinking, what are the places where do they all go? I thought of the hospital, I thought of churches, and then I thought of the tailor, and she was just right, for the book, and just the metaphorical idea that she's sort of stitching things together. She's holding the book together, even though she's not as central as the other character. So that's a very astute observation.
It really is. Thank you so much, Nyaga. There is a comment here from Stephanie Nairo that I'm just going to read aloud. I love that idea. So it must have been about the last question we were talking about, but it's still relevant. Very often on the continent, we are focused on making tea and getting on with our daily tasks, when the roof over our heads is on fire because of the policy decisions made by our leaders. Would you like to just chat a bit about how that played out in the novel?
Excuse me. That's how it plays out. That there's all these, the quote that begins, "From everything good will come." I'm just going to grab my copy now, because I don't want to misquote Sefiata. He was a writer that I admire a lot.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so apt, thinking about, and these 4 books are whole books that I've thought about Nigeria. I've asked questions that are similar to the ones I'm asking here. This says, muffled rage stalks like the wind, sudden and invisible. People don't fear the wind until it fells a tree. Then they say it's too much. So it's like there's all these things happening all the time, and nobody really pays attention until like the fire gets to the living. But it's been all the time, and sometimes it's because we feel safe in our seclusions. We've been able to make a little nice little cocoon, and everyone feels insulated, or enough people feel insulated to just can get on and carry on, and that's happening to them there. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. It's okay. Do we have any other questions?
Okay. Mhm.
Okay, there's a question here from Natalie. Thank you so much both for writing this wonderful work and for allowing us to listen into this great conversation. I'm always curious about what authors I enjoy reading. So can I ask what you're currently reading?
Well, yeah. Sorry, excuse me. So, reading, I tend to read multiple books at the same time, and then I tend to also reread books. So recently I read, and this might be a good palate cleanser for anyone who's been sort of shattered by fellow good things. It's a book called Dear Committee Members that I discovered in a library. And I've now gotten my own copy. It's by a woman called Julie. I can't pronounce the surname. I'm sorry. It's Chumancha. I'm sorry, but it's called Dear Committee Members. It's hilarious. It's told in a series of recommendation letters by a university professor. I'm laughing. My sides are aching. Maybe someday I'll be able to write something like that. It's hilarious. That's one of the things I'm reading now. I'm also reading Night Bloom. By Peace Medi. I hope I pronounced that correctly, which is about cousins, two cousins in Ghana. At least as far as I've gone, they're very close, and they're at a point where that bond is fracturing now. I'm really enjoying it. It's very riveting, very beautifully written. So those are the two things that I'm reading that are fiction. Yeah. Makena, I think you're muted.
Oh dear. I was saying, the Dear Committee Members sounds like such a fun read. I'm actually, as soon as we're done, going to go look for it as well. But also your work is very humorous. There are definitely moments there where I was really laughing, particularly the dialogue. That was so well done, and also like the observations that the characters have in the book as well. There are definitely moments there that are very humorous, and yeah, so that's just a random addition that I want to make. Oh yeah,
Thank you.
I can see a question that James Murua has written. So great conversation. Your work is being translated into other languages, and the French version of Stay With Me is an award winner. How important are translations to you? What have they done for your career? That's such a good question.
Translations are very interesting because sometimes they're like, I don't even know what is there, because I don't speak this language. I think they've definitely made the stories travel beyond anything I could have imagined. Would Stay With Me, I think the moments where I felt, okay, this is interesting, or one of the many moments, there were many moments, with the reception that it got, was that I was doing an event in Sweden, and some woman comes up to me and she said, this mother-in-law reminds me of my mother-in-law. I couldn't have thought, but good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
But I think that it's done a lot for my career, definitely. But
Yeah.
it's been read in languages that I don't even understand, that people are writing me from different parts of the world and talking about how they identified with the character. I think one of the things that it's done for me, particularly with Stay With Me, is it's given me the confidence to stay true to the perspectives of the stories that I want to tell. Because all of that feedback from as far flung as Sweden, or Turkey, has made me feel that if I do it well, human beings are always legible to one another. There might be details of, this is how they make their own cup of coffee that is different from our own. But the part of what the things we yearn for, we're legible across culture, across countries, across borders. So I think that's one thing that feedback that it's had in other languages has done for me. And there are a few other translations that are important to me that I'm working on, and which will be reviewed in due course.
It's very exciting. We have another question here from Amanda. Do you base your storylines on personal experiences of yours and people you know, or do you use research to develop and build out the ideas?
I think it's really mostly research. The things that there's research and there's the news, which for me is a very interesting and useful source. There's the news, and sometimes it's old news. Something that happened in 2003 that I just did not stop thinking about, so it becomes a novel 10 years later. So there's that personal experience. I really, with fiction, I try to stay away from it as much as possible, because when I'm writing fiction, people write differently. Fiction for me is a process of discovery. So if it's something that I know too well, it might not be very interesting for me to write. So for instance, this novel, the main character as a woman is a doctor. I didn't go to medical school. Stay with me, it's a hairdresser who has a very different life, for mine. So I'm really interested in it's as much a heart of creation for me as a way to explore my own curiosity. So I'm very interested in more opportunity to research and go down rabbit holes, and I love that part of it.
It is the best but then at the end of a project, you're left with all this information about an English career. So I just my second manuscript that I've been working on is about a perfumer, and I have so much information in my head about the chemistry of perfumes, and you just walk around I think that's the funnest part about, one of the most fun parts about getting into a project that huge in size as a novel. You just get into a whole world. With my first one, it was Southby's Finest. It's set in an estate and in the 90s, and although I was alive then, you still have to go back and do research. And there's so much information about the architecture, the what was happening in the newspaper then that is just there. And I love that. I think that's what makes writing truly one of the most fantastic things about that process of writing. Of course, it can be a very difficult process, but it's fun. So I really like that. Are there any more questions? Okay, so I think this is a good time to wrap up. I've had such a fun time being in conversation with you, Ayọ bámi. Congratulations once again on the long list, and also congratulations on the success of Stay With Me. 1 second, let me just check what is on my messages here. One moment. Okay, sorry, I was not understanding that. So for any Nairobi people in the audience, Stay With Me is at Cheche, both the hardback and the paperback, and I have a hardback because OG and very serious. But yes, Ayọ bámi, would you like to say anything else before we?
I just want to say thank you to everyone who's come on this evening, to everyone who reads and gives feedback. It makes all the hours of work feel worth it. And thank you for Dr. Joyce for your comment. I'm really grateful to every reader. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and making this conversation what it was. And thank you for the
And
question.
thank you, Makena. This was really, really, really fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, had a really fun night. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Your questions were very insightful.